This week's episode is brought to you by Optus. Modern work happens everywhere, and businesses need to deliver seamless digital experiences without compromising security. Smart organisations are building security into the device and the connection, giving employees frictionless access wherever they're working, while the business gains visibility, control, and resilience. Talk to Optus today about our managed mobility solutions. Hello and welcome to the iTnews podcast. Our guest this fortnight is James NG, the Chief Information Security Officer for Insignia Financial. Insignia Financial is perhaps better known by its component parts, which includes the old IOOF, as well as the ANZ Wealth and MLC Wealth divisions that it acquired from ANZ and NAB respectively. It's spent the past 3 years consolidating its security estate and removing duplicated effort and inefficiency from security operations processes. James starts by taking us through the current security strategy, as well as the next one under development.
From our perspective, we run a 3-year current strategy at the moment. We're actually in the final year of our strategy. The security strategy is from FY24 to FY26. It does cover off a number of different elements and components, but the key call out from our end is we really had a cyber vision that was in alignment with the corporate organisational strategy as well. And that's very much focused on ensuring that we're protecting and servicing out the wellbeing for all of our Australian individuals and members. We've got millions of them, and we really wanted security to be a strategic enabler of that. We want to make sure that we're helping the business do things in a safe and secure way whilst protecting them at the same time. The pillars are probably not too dissimilar to perhaps your other guests. So we've got 6 principles that guide the design of that strategy, and that's ensuring that we've got security baked in by design and by action. We've got defence in depth. We've got better practice alignment. We take a risk and data-centric approach, and we're wanting to ensure that we've embedded security culture. And last but not least, we want to make sure that we're actually building on our strategic partnerships as well. Holistically, the strategy is aligned to the NIST framework, and so that's how we ensure that we're tracking our maturity and growth against that and ensuring that we're progressing upwards favourably over time as well. Part of the NIST framework itself, we've got several initiatives that are tied to those principles. A number of them are cyber-led type initiatives, but we also recognise that there's a number of activities that are delivered enterprise-wide that contribute to that cyber maturity as well. So the cyber strategy, and we've got an underpinning program of work. That program of work is delivered by security team, but also contributed to and supported by the wider enterprise as a whole.
What's it like running a 3-year timeline for the strategy as opposed to, say, like a rolling strategy? How does it work, and where are you up to in terms of planning the next one?
Whilst we set a 3-year strategy and we have a forward-looking 36-month view, we also took the decision to do an annual refresh of that strategy in the context of ensuring that the initiatives that we were working on are fit for purpose. So in our landscape, both even if you look at internally what the business is doing, but externally in terms of the threat landscape itself, we need an ability to be able to pivot. So ensuring that we're keeping things up to date is key. That annual check-in allows us to revisit that and make any adjustments as we need to. We are partway through developing our FY27 plus strategy, and that's very much focused on ensuring that we're continuing to deliver what we already have in train. It's worthwhile actually explaining a little bit of historical context, because we're actually the collection of several organisations coming together, IOOF, ANZ Wealth and NAB Wealth or MLC. They've come together to form Insignia Financial. The initial strategy that we're delivering was very much focused on bringing those organisations together. You can imagine we had multiples of everything in place, not just processes and technology, but that also cascaded down to security as well. We've been rebaselining, driving some level of complexity out of the organisation, and that focus continues as we start to do the FY27 strategy development to really look at consolidation, optimization and simplification. And to get that in a more practical nuance, it's very much around, well, we've made the uplift, we've made the investments, How do we ensure we get the right return on investment or the ROI? And that may be things like where we continue to optimize the tooling that we've deployed or continue to roll out capabilities or extend that rollout to ensure that we have complete visibility across our environments.
When you were looking at that simplification, did you look across the three potentially different systems that you had in the different constituent businesses and then sort of pick one and then standardize across the other two? Or did you go completely greenfields in some areas across the whole three previously constituent businesses?
We took a combination of both. When we looked at what we needed to achieve from a strategic perspective and the underlying initiatives, we obviously revisited and looked at what do we currently have in place? Was that fit for purpose around where we were heading? And then overlaid that with a market comparison and an evaluation as well. And in some instances, that resulted in us consolidating onto an existing platform and capability and then rolling that out further. In some instances, it was, hey, we actually only have this capability in one of the organizations, but we want to be able to roll it out to the other parts of our environment as well. And then thirdly, there was actually instances where we would remove all of those tools because things change very quickly in our space. And we found that there's actually something that's better fit for what we want to do, probably more leading edge in terms of the capability that's occurred over the past 12, 24, 36 months. So in those instances, we actually decide to implement and roll out a new solution.
So you mentioned that things change fairly quickly. You also mentioned before that you're reviewing the cyber strategy on a 12-month rolling basis. I'm just wondering how things change year to year, whether the cadence of activity shifts that greatly compared to what you'd previously predicted in the past 12 months, how you'd move ahead.
It's interesting because we both overlay, I guess, or consider internal factors. Have there been any changes in the business and the business priorities and where they want to head and where they need support? There may be programs that come into play that were not necessarily forecasted as part of the original strategy. How do we support that as a security organisation? And that may be internal transformation, and it may even be go-to-market or product transformation as well. The other element is the external landscape, and I don't just mean the threat landscape because our threat actor environment changes all the time, but we've also had a lot of focus and enhancement from a regulatory and government perspective as well. And so when they put additional focus requirements and guidance, we need to be able to pivot onto that as well. If I look at the recent annual refresh that we did, there were a couple of initiatives that we decided to reprioritize and bring forward others. And I think that's just part of us in terms of ensuring that, as I said, the roadmap is fit for purpose and meeting on the organisation's needs and demands whilst overlaying that cyber risk landscape as well.
Is that like the prioritisation in recent years of, say, CPS 234, for example, or some of the regulation security with finance?
Correct. When I joined the organisation just over 2 years ago, a lot of that focus was on CPS 234. The sector, from a financial services perspective, had just completed a number of tripartite assessments. On the back of that, there were a number of activities that were identified or focus areas for us. Certainly, CPS 234 was a catalyst for us, but I would even look at that and say, well, Insignia Financial plays in that critical infrastructure space. So changes in government regulation as well. If you think about the SOCI Act, the Cybersecurity Act, etc., as well, has played a leading role, but also both the regulator and government as they uplift their maturity and what they want to do across industry. We want to make sure that we're playing a leading part as part of that community and also a bit of an influential and leading voice in the industry as well.
One other thing is I noticed that when you described the new strategy, you just said 27 plus. Does that maybe point to changing that 36-month view of cybersecurity, or are you still going to look 3 years in advance with the 1 year annual reviews, or are you just going to go year to year to year now that some of the baseline and the foundations are in place?
Yeah, good question. So we've got a company-wide strategy that goes out to FY30. So it's actually slightly a little bit longer than the typical 3-year tranche. But from our perspective, we probably would look at having a cyber security strategy going out to FY30 in alignment with the corporate strategy. However, we want to make sure we've got a commitment that we do that annual refresh every 12 months. So whilst we don't think the strategy in terms of the key fundamentals and thematics will change, the underlying roadmap and program that is there to support the delivery of that strategy, we expect that that will change or ensure that it's up to date every 12 months or so as part of that annual cycle.
Do you want to just talk maybe about one or two of the priority areas that you're focusing attention on in the immediate term in this next sort of 12-month period?
The two things that are very front of mind for me, and I'm a bit of a stickler for ensuring that we don't just get distracted by the next new shiny thing, is we've made a significant set of investments to really consolidate our tool set. We've gone from a multitude of different vendors that we inherited from those three different disparate organisations coming together, and we've brought that into a much more reduced set of strategic partners and platforms. And so I want to ensure that we're giving the team the runway to complete those deployments. So not just implement the tool, but we want to make sure that we're optimizing and tuning those tools and complete the rollout. So if we're deploying new capability across the organization, we want to make sure the security capability is keeping up with that as well. That's a focus primarily across our IT type environments. And then the other aspect, which is sort of comes hand in hand as well, is very much removing that duplication. I often use the concept of swivel chair. I sometimes look at our analysts' screens and they've got 50 windows open because they're pivoting from one screen to another. If there's a way we can help them reduce that complexity and make their lives a lot easier, that's what we're aiming to do as well. Tackle it from a consolidation pathway and ensure we've got that visibility and rollout across the organisation, and then remove the duplication or complexity where we can as well. That's essentially the two key immediate focus areas for us. And a lot of that extends across your entire security tooling ecosystem. So if you think about endpoint, if we think about network, if you think about authentication, there's sort of ones that we've been looking at and getting some real positive wins, certainly as part of this current program.
Is that down to implementing like a central SIEM or a security data lake or something that's going to bring all that data together? Or how are you looking at approaching that challenge?
Yeah, so I think part of it is getting it into the one place. So one of our initiatives has been on consolidating those disparate data sources into a single pane of glass. And I think that's a aspirational target. I think reality is, and I explain this to our team as well and analysts, we're not necessarily going to get to the one screen, but I think that should be our aspiration to reduce as many as possible. So certainly on our end, we've been working on how do we get all the data in the one set system or systems, maybe there's a couple or a few of them maximum, and then being able to display that information so they don't need to pivot across. The other element is very much extending the managed service components as well. So ensuring that we've got 24/7 coverage and monitoring of that telemetry that's coming in. It's really valuable and important to us. So we've been replacing that disparate legacy type product and tool sets and rolling out something that's a little bit more leading edge. That is far superior, much more reduced number of screens. And in addition, we've got the managed service over the top, gives us the out of hours coverage.
And I should ask maybe just for you to clarify or just talk a little bit about the security operation itself in terms of maybe how many staff and sort of what the mix is in terms of the stuff that's done internally versus managed services, which you just mentioned.
When I started, part of the reason why I joined was the organisation made a deliberate call out to say we wanted to build out more of our in-house capability. So historically, if I looked at the mix, we probably had a larger set of the resourcing, more dependent and reliant on our external vendors and partners. Over the last 18 months in particular, we've been shifting that split accordingly to bring up more internal resourcing on our end. So I think for us, we've had upwards of 50 odd people now in the team. And that's a significant investment of where we've come from. And we've really approached it in terms of rebuilding the security capability. Each of those organisations, you can imagine when they came in, it wasn't to say that we didn't have security capability. It was that they were mostly decentralised into other parts of the business. When I joined, we had a mandate to actually establish an enterprise-wide function. And that meant bringing in those different security teams, which is essentially, if I looked at day +2, it was very much focused on where does that capability live today? Let's bring it together. At least we're in the one place. But then we took a lot more of a conscious and deliberate approach around what is the actual function that we need to be able to deliver on that strategy and that underlying program. And that took a little bit of a longer time. So we're sort of looking at 6 months to build a business case around what is it that we actually need versus the knee-jerk reaction of just hiring additional people. And so we looked at that both from a top-down perspective, so alignment with the corporate strategy, where did the business want to go, what are the resources and capability that we needed to keep up with this business and support them in that delivery. And then we also took a bottom-up approach where we've aligned and done an analysis against the NIST capability domains and then actually did mappings and go, okay, where do we have current skill sets? Where do we need more? what's the split between external and internal, and do we have that right mix in play? And we used both sets of that analysis to really inform the resource model that we needed, and we badged that as our target operating model, or our TOM. And we've just recently completed the full rollout of that TOM, because we did that in several waves as well. You can imagine when we announced the target operating model, that involves some reorganizational design element to it. There's a 3-wave approach to that model. The first wave was on really establishing the leadership team and what we needed. And we did somewhat borrow from the NIST elements. So we've got a function that's focused on governance and strategy. We've got a function that's focused on design and assurance. So not only are we building security in, but are we actually implementing what we said we would at the start of that design process? Then we've got a cyber engineering capability, and then a cyber resilience team as well, or a security operations function. And then also supporting us is a cyber program team, and that really helps us deliver on those initiatives, providing us the project management capability and support required. So that's the functional areas, but that's what we did in terms of that top-down, bottom-up. And as I said, we're at the last wave because we hired the leadership team to lead those functions. Then we allowed those leaders to hire their managers. And then the last wave is we allowed those managers to hire their team members as well. So there was allowed them to help design or pull together a bit of their capability in team as well, and have a say in that, which I think is really important.
And do you want to just talk a little bit about capability building within that team? So obviously you've talked a lot about the mechanics of assembling it, but I'm interested in hearing about what your approach is and maybe what some of the more effective ways you've seen to build up that internal cyber function and capability are.
I often say proof's in the pudding as well. It's good to talk about what strategies could work. And perhaps for the listeners, I always preface this. My experience may not be exactly the same as another organisation. So I always encourage everyone to take out those nuggets that's relevant for them. And hopefully it's of value and they can apply that in their role or their organisation as well. But certainly there are a couple of things that we wanted to work on. One was around building or rebuilding trust and credibility of the security function within the organisation, but also with the boards in particular. That was really important in terms of setting the agenda, ensuring that they had the right level of information, and then in turn we were getting the appropriate support from the top, and that was cascading through the teams as well. The second element I would say, and it's something that was maybe fortunate timing, is we conduct engagement surveys throughout as a bit of a finger on the pulse on how we're going with team morale, engagement, are they on board, are they motivated, etc. And certainly when I joined, we had one of the lowest engagement scores comparative to my peers, which is perhaps maybe not surprising given we had gone through quite a lot of change and put that in the structure as part of that day+2 format. But I think what was really nice was after we went through all of those changes to build the construct of the operating model, bring in all the new people or bring in existing people, but into the new functional structures, we saw that engagement change within that 12-month period to go from one of the least engaged teams to one of the highest engaged teams relative to peers as well. So that was a significant momentum swing, all the whilst the organisation continues to change and deliver and transform as it needs. So that was a really big testament in terms of where we landed. But there were a few things that we did along the way that I thought was particularly helpful. One was we made a conscious decision to set shared KPIs. And I don't mean shared KPIs in the context of enterprise-wide, and we've got to hit certain financial metrics necessarily or outcomes, but shared KPIs from a security team perspective. Are we all on the same page and going, these are the key priorities that we're wanting to deliver on, and we're all rowing in the same direction? And it was really great that we were able to form shared KPIs, but also get input from the wider team, because it allowed us to shake out if there were concerns around, well, I don't understand how I contribute to that metric. I'm not really going to buy into it. I think that was really important for us because it meant once it was set, people were aligned to it, we were all heading in the right direction. And it also made the performance review process a lot more seamless as well, getting them on board. So certainly the shared KPIs was really helpful on that side. And then probably the other element is, as I said, yes, the structure or the process of building out the operating model, but having that reference where each of the leaders and the leaders of the other leaders can have a say in how they shape the team and bring in the right people to help build that culture was really important. We have a construct called our ways of working, and that's almost like an ongoing live initiative where we take feedback directly from our people, not just from those engagement surveys, but throughout. We actually input that into a ways of working stream of initiatives. And so it means that we're holding up our promise back to our team and individuals across those teams to say, hey, thanks for that feedback. We're actually taking it seriously and we're driving action, but also recognizing we can't do everything that everyone sort of may have provided some commentary on, but we acknowledge that and face into that as well. So we want to make sure we're prioritising what we think is going to be the most valuable, most important, and resonate with the team, and we put those into action, and then we provide status updates on how those initiatives are tracking. And that could be all sorts of things like building social events, having more game nights, etc. It's not always focused on ways of working in the context of delivering security work and activities. It's really more focused around building the right culture in the group.
We've talked a lot about strategy. We've talked a lot about what some of the sort of initiatives are. But if you want to cast your eye a bit further out on the horizon, are there any areas of security operations or anything related that you're looking at the moment as maybe an overlooked aspect or a risk that you think deserves more focus from a security leadership perspective or a security operations perspective?
Yeah, it's probably two, and I always like ending on a positive. So the first one I'll look at is more around what some of those eye to the future, the emerging risks, which I'll question, are they emerging yet or are we already hit with them now? But certainly post-quantum computing is one that I think is a focus. I think there's a recognition that there's a lot of work when it does hit, and I've seen different timelines going out to 2030 plus, etc. around that, but there's a lot of work involved in doing that. And the challenge that security teams and leaders have is you're often balancing the risks of the here and now versus the risks of into the future, notwithstanding that risk in the future around post-quantum, as I said, could be absolutely game-changing in terms of its impact. So I think there's some work and planning that a lot of organisations and security teams and leaders can do in advance of that. And I think that's where a lot of my focus is looking at as we start to develop that FY27 plus strategy is what can we do now that is considered no regrets work that we'll have to do irrespective of when that timeline hits or irrespective of where that technology lands as being post-quantum ready or post-quantum resistant. And then the other element isn't so much a risk per se, it's more around an opportunity that and it goes back to that team sport mentality. I think there's probably no denying that the threat actors operate in an ecosystem. There's a thriving marketplace there. They work together. They're all really good at certain things, and that's how they get their economies of scale. And I think there's really opportunities for us as a community, so not just financial services, but even if I look at the various lenses that we apply, for us to work together to drive greater outcomes and get that scale that perhaps the threat actors may look at from an advantageous perspective. I think we can turn that on its head as well. And so for us, that's about building the security community within the superannuation space, making sure we're contributing it from a critical infrastructure lens, making sure we're partaking and participating it from a government lens as well, and then looking at that financial services in Australia, but then also how do we actually bring our partners and like-minded individuals together globally as well. And I think that is going to be the opportunity space. And then finally is AI. And certainly this is one of those ones I'd say is the here and now. And for us, when we're looking ahead, we compartmentalize it into 3 different areas. And that's really about how do we secure AI? So if the business has got AI strategies or use cases, we want to make sure they do that in a safe and trusted manner. How do we defend against AI? And this is very much threat actors leveraging AI to conduct malicious activity, whether that's augmentation, whether that's generative, whether that's deepfakes, etc. How do we defend against those new type of attack scenarios? And then lastly, we should look at AI as an opportunity within security itself. So how do we leverage AI across the security team in particular? So they're the 3 headline areas when it comes to AI. I'll sort of quash that as going, is it here now or is it emerging? It's something that we're facing into at the moment.
That's the episode for this fortnight. Stay tuned for the next episode. And for all the latest headlines and happenings in Australian technology news, head over to itnews.com.au.